So I'm not here to talk about my professional career per se, but I'm going to talk about NCC's Sustainable Development Strategy. And I want to say before I start that it's really an NCC effort. It's something that's implemented by all staff. So we're a really small team implementing quite a lot actually under the SES. I'm going to say this like that for the rest of the presentation. But it's a global, like it's a very interesting effort led by all at the NCC. So for those who don't know the NCC is a federal crown corporation. We manage about 10% of the lands in the National Capital Region. And one of the main mission is to prepare plans for and assist in the development, conservation, and improvement of the National Capital Region. And really it's to build and inspiring capitals for all Canadians. So you may think of the NCC for Gatineau Park, a conservation park of about 360 square kilometers. But you may also think of the NCC as the largest publicly owned greenbelt in the world, which is about 150 square kilometers. You may think of the NCC for its various urban parks, about 20 square kilometers, so Major Hill, Confederation Park, and a lot of linear parks on the rivers. You may also know the NCC for the large network of Recreational Pathway. We manage about 300 kilometers of Recreational Pathway. It's parkways, Confederation Boulevard. You may not know as much the NCC for its large portfolio of residential and commercial buildings. So we have about a 1,200 buildings portfolio, and 900 of them are solely commercial and residential building. So it's quite a large portfolio. Something else too is that we have a lot of farms on our lands that we manage, about 54 square kilometers of farms. And we have about 75 kilometers of waterfront property. So it's quite a diverse portfolio that the NCC manage. And when I say this, actually it's interesting because sustainability and environmental management is really part of the NCC DNA. It's something that we've been doing since the creation of the mandate of the NCC. So it really just, it comes naturally. But we can always do better. And that's why that in 2018, the NCC Board of Directors actually approved a Sustainable Development Strategy for the 2018-2023 cycle. It was a strategy that was co-drafted by about 50% of the staff at the NCC, but there was quite a lot of consultation too with regional stakeholders, and we received comments from the general public, from over 600 members of the general public. So the Sustainable Development Strategy, the SES, really provide a focused and innovative agenda for environmental leadership in Canada's capital region. I'm not going to read this all, but in a nutshell, the vision for the SES is really to protect our legacy, the natural and cultural heritage of the National Capital Region. And to do that, we need to work with partners for a green and inclusive region, to value health and well-being of all residents, and visitors. And to do that, we need to take action on climate change, to build resilient infrastructure, to protect national capital, promote sustainable agriculture and safe communities, and one that we tend to forget, connect Canadians with nature. So the framework of the strategy is like that. This framework is really much based on the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy for the cycle of 2016-2019. So I'm going to go into not all of these boxes. I'm going to go over a few of them. I'm not going to talk about the 76 indicators tonight, and because I could be here all night. But I'll give you an overview of the focus area and an overview of some of the actions and the work that we're currently working on. So there's two focus areas: partnership for regional sustainability and improving the built environment for human health. So creating sustainable communities require collaboration, as you know, across political and geographical boundaries. And we need various experts, various disciplines to do that. So through the implementation of our strategy, the NCC will act as a leader jointly with regional partners to move beyond just greening our operations, but to actually build a more sustainable capital region. And for that, actually, 16 out of the 36 actions that you'll find in our strategy is actually to be implemented in collaboration with partners. So this is very interesting, and that's why I'm very excited to be here tonight. The other focused area is improving built environment for human health. So the built environment has many impacts on the health and wellness of Canadians. Actually, health outcomes is influenced by the interaction between the individuals and their social and physical environment, and including, for example, access to nature, transportation options, physical accessibility, extreme weather events, access to healthful food. Sorry, wow, that's that's not easy. And this is really just to name a few. So we think that many actions in our strategy have the potential to positively influence the various determinants of human health. So now on the 6 principles. So the strategy is built on 6 principles that will impact the way we do business. They determine really the how we will implement the strategy. And let me give you a few details about each of them. So, you know, we want to make sure that we track our progress and that we communicate it with the public and actually to learn from our mistakes. This is really a learning process for all of us. So this is when I talk about transparency and accountability. In terms of collaboration, we need to find synergies and leverage resources out there to bring groups together. This is very important for us. We want to continue to engage the public in a genuine manner and to build capacity for sustainable development. From a national capital point of view, we want to ensure that the value of the natural spaces and the ecosystem services that are actually given by the lands that we manage are actually taken into account when decisions are made. And lastly, but not the least, we want to start considering the social impacts of our projects, assets, and programs. This is a new way for the NCC to look at how we manage our assets and programs to ensure they provide the most benefit to the greatest number of people, thereby helping us to better fulfill our mandate. So, as I said, the framework of our current SES is really has been very much influenced by the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. So this is where you find 10 out of the 13 aspirational long-term goals. It actually also reflected, as we went through our consultation, it really reflects what we've heard from the general public. So that was very interesting to see the synergies between both. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go over just the top 10 actions. I say top 10 actions, they're actually very much all important, but I just want to highlight 10 tonight. So first of all, we want to promote sustainable transportation and mobility. This is one of our actions. And to do this, we're currently renewing our capital pathway plan. We are currently also reviewing our parkway policies, but we're also working and renewing a regional sustainable transportation and mobility strategy. So this is work currently ongoing, and that will continue for a few years. And again, you can definitely see the collaboration between the different players in the region from the Quebec and the Ontario side, and we think that it's very important. The other one is to evaluate, the other action is to evaluate the risk of climate change impacts and develop a climate change adaptation and resiliency plan. I'm not going to talk too much about this now because I'm going to give you much more detail in a few minutes about that. It's one that I dig into. Another action is to restore degraded shorelines along watercourses and lakes. We have started identifying and prioritize degraded shorelines. We've actually also need to complete an assessment of treatment archaeological legacy on NCC shorelines. I don't know if you're aware, but the region is a major pole for Indigenous communities in the past in terms of trading and communication. And we have a lot of archaeological sites on our lands. And unfortunately, because of erosion, most of those, well, unfortunately, those sites are mostly located along the shorelines. And unfortunately, due to erosion, we're losing all that legacy. If you're talking to Ian Badgley, our archaeologist at the NCC, he says that we can lose up to 1,000 years of history per year just because of erosion. And of course he's panicking because he's seeing all those artifacts actually, you know, washing away in the river, and we're losing that history. So we've created a baseline data collected for about 16 sites in the past year, and we continue to measure and identify mitigation measures actually to control erosion and preserve that legacy. So we're going to continue to actually identify those problematic shorelines and start restoration on many of them. Another action is to create a pollinator habitat landscape program. Many of you know that pollinators are quite important in this ecosystem, in the ecosystem. So we have completed research to start drafting guidelines. We're actually, you know, connecting with experts on that topic. We have a lot of lands where, for example, we stopped in some places mowing grasses to create those meadows, and we're seeing so much biodiversity coming to those lands, and it's very interesting. Just to give an example, we're actually currently working with the Canadian Wildlife Federation to create some of those big meadows kind of restoration. So we hope to bring an increase of pollinator species on our lands. The second one here is quite interesting. We actually want to diversify farmlands covered by monoculture farming operations. Just in the past 2 years, we actually converted converted about 300 hectares, of cash crop to food production just in the Greenbelt. And we're seeing more and more interest actually from the general public to make sure that we can provide local food sources. So we're working with the farmers and we're working with various partners to do that. It's always very interesting to see the ideas from the farmers, but also the partners on that topic. Of course, we want to continue to promote the connectivity of ecosystem and natural habitat. For Gatineau Park, all the potential corridors have been identified in the past year. We're working with the City of Ottawa and many other organizations to actually continue to identify those corridors and you know, adjacent to the Greenbelt or even between the urban areas. Like, we all think sometimes that ecological corridors are those like pristine green corridors, but they can also be smaller and small patchwork. So it's a very interesting topic. And the other action here is to adopt stormwater management guidelines. This is still on the go, but you know, the provincial Ontario standard is that, you know, projects, new development needs to absorb stormwater on the site. So we're working very hard to make this happen too on federal lands. So another action is to adopt bird-friendly standards for building design, and I'm not going to say more because I'm going to also talk about that project in a bit. As you know, sometimes, like since 2012, we have adopted a policy for pesticide application that prohibits application on our lands from a cosmetic point of view. And of course, you know, there's always new research conducted to identify new pesticides that could be harmful to human health or the environment. So we're fortunate actually this winter to work with students from the University of Ottawa that will help us assess and do an evaluation of the pesticide that are sometimes still used on our lands, to help us actually do a literature review and bring recommendation in terms of what could be the alternatives to some of those pesticides, maybe on farmlands, or maybe when we actually, you know, we have invasive species that we need to control to protect species at risk, for example. It can be quite complex sometimes, the usage of pesticides. So stay tuned. This is going to be in our annual report later, so it's going to be interesting. I'm going to quickly transition to the 5 current projects, and I saw Lucas giving me the 5 minutes, so I'm sorry, I take always more time. So climate change adaptation and resiliency plan. Well, you all know that Canada is warming, actually on average about double the magnitude of global warming. It's quite alarming. It poses risk to all sectors of the economy and Canadians' quality of life. And actions on climate change mitigation adaptation actually are critically required to limit impacts on people and ecosystems. So this is why it's actually a very much prioritized action under our current SDS. So we're currently working in partnership with the City of Ottawa to acquire climate projections for the NCR It's going to be a very detailed report, quite technical actually, that's going to be available to the general public in April, so stay tuned. We want to make this data available to everyone, to all our partners, and we'll organize some session to explain how to use the data. Not everyone has the budget to actually do those kind of research, and we've been working with Environment Canada. I cannot tell you what are those projections because I want you to wait for April, but we're still working on the report. But this is what's going on right now, and it's going to be very interesting to help us into our phase 2 risk assessment. So for the next year, we're going to be looking at identifying risk and vulnerabilities to our assets, operations, and various programs. You may think of Rideau Canal Gateway, for example, but a lot of people don't think of the impact of climate change on building envelopes, for example, or HVAC, or road maintenance, or biodiversity, and human health is huge. Lyme disease, you've all heard about Lyme disease in the past year. So, and our last point here is that, and after we have done that assessment on risk, we're going to create an adaptation and resiliency plan for our assets, programs, and operation. So I quickly move to flood risk assessment. I mean, the floods of 2017 and 2019 showed how important it is for the NCC's asset to be flood resistant. The impacts of climate change make this issue even more pressing. So the objective of this project is really to accurately map the existing floodplains, and we're going to be working with the City of Ottawa and Gatineau to update those data based on historical data. And because of the future climate projections, what we want to do is try to also update those maps based on historical data with future projections. It's something that has not been done too much in Canada in the past. Like, there's maybe 2 or 3 cases in Canada, so we're going to be trying to innovate here and work with experts on the hydraulic model. And then after, we want to identify the risk to our assets and develop mitigation measure. In terms of climate mitigation, it's really part of our obligation under Goal 2 of the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy to track and report our GHG emissions from our facilities and fleet. So the federal target is to reduce by 40% based on a 2005 baseline by 2030, and the long-term objective is to reduce emission by 80% by 2050. So in 2017-2018, we're still working on the data for 18-19, shortly to come, but we have reduced our emission by about 58% since 2005. And of course, this includes, the significant portion of these reductions actually come from the fact that Ontario's electricity grid is much more cleaner. And that's why we're presenting you 2 numbers. So if we were to look only at NCC efforts to reduce our GHG emissions, we've actually reduced it by 13%. Since 2005. So, the question here is, we need to make a lot of effort to reach a 2050 target. We'll have to make major changes, because we can no longer rely on the grid that is about 94% clean in Ontario and 99% clean in Quebec. So we'll have to think how we actually do fuel switching, renewable energy procurement and production, deep retrofits to our portfolio, etc. So I'm changing here forest strategy. I have just a few more slides.
It's totally fine.
I'm fine? Okay. So for the past year and a half, we've been working at drafting a forest strategy, which is going to be a high-level plan for the management and protection of trees and forests on NCC lands. Trees and forests on federal lands is really contributing to a healthy, diverse, and connected regional green network that provides essential ecosystem services in the region. So this forest strategy will consider natural and cultural heritage values, but will really focus on urban tree protection. Under our Sustainable Development Strategy, we've already committed to plant 100,000 trees. And then, of course, this is very much a collaborative approach. We'll be working with the municipalities and various partners. And to start the forest strategy, if you have not participated yet in our consultation on this topic, we've actually completed with the University of Vermont their spatial laboratory analysis lab, this very cool project that used aerial photo with LiDAR to identify actually the canopy cover on our lands, but we've worked in partnership with Ottawa and Gatineau to do this. So this is very much a new tool to help us in decision making. If we combine this with social equity, socioeconomic status data, for example, we could identify where canopy cover is actually lower in some more vulnerable communities. We could also identify urban heat island. So it's actually a new kind of lens of information that really is useful for the planning purpose of the strategy. I really invite you to go on our website and you can read actually the very interesting report and dig into the data. And the last project I want to highlight is actually we're working on bird-friendly guidelines for our portfolio. I don't know if you knew, but it is estimated that 25 million of birds are killed in Canada each year from window collisions. And because of our large portfolio building, it was estimated that it has the potential to be killing or injuring up to 13,000 birds per year. Something else that's quite interesting is that it's now illegal under the Environmental Protection Act and the Species at Risk Act for building to emit or reflect light that kills or injures birds. So we're currently developing those bird-friendly standards to reduce the risk of our buildings to birds. And CSA, so I forgot the acronym.
Canadian Standards Association.
Thank you, Ken. Canadian Standards Association. They actually recently just published a voluntary national standard. It's well done. You unfortunately have to pay for it, but we're trying to resolve this with them. That can be used during the building design phase or when you're retrofitting existing buildings. So it's so well done that we want to integrate this into our bird-friendly guidelines. And of course, you know, there's some relatively easy ways to protect birds from building collision by reducing the window-to-wall ratio, applying frit patterns to glass, and using louvre or shades to reduce reflected light. So, and we recently actually contributed with Nature Canada and another group in Ottawa to draft an Ottawa bird strategy that should be launched at the end of March, so stay tuned for that too. So what is coming up? A lot of things is coming up. We're going to be publishing our climate projections for the National Capital Region in April. We are also going to be holding an annual regional sustainability workshop. This is one of our commitments under our strategy because we need to increase collaboration and we need to have those regular meetings to actually exchange and share lesson learns and new opportunities. As usual, we are going to be presenting to our board of directors in June our annual report for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. We're going to be launching in the fall our first strategy, and there's going to be more public consultation and stakeholder consultation in the summer. We have our ongoing Urbanism Lab events. I don't know if you're aware, but we have a tremendous program. We bring speakers, and it's very, actually it's almost all the time linked to sustainability, so it's very interesting if you are not aware of those events. And lastly, I just want to mention that the NCC, as of December 1st, 2020, is actually going to become a designated entity under the Act, the Federal Sustainable Development Act. We've been doing this on a voluntary basis since many years, but now we're going to be required to report and to contribute to the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. I'm very excited by that. It means a lot of things, but I think it's a very good news for the NCC and the region. So, how to stay informed. So we have a newsletter. If you go on our webpage for the Sustainable Development Strategy, we've created that newsletter to bring people and connect people together. You can read on our strategy on our webpage, and actually you can also consult our upcoming annual report. So I'm going to stop here. Okay. Thank you very much.
It might just be me, but there was a ton of information in that slideshow. Very well presented. It was lovely. But just to get into a couple more of the details. First off, a bit about you, Geneviève. Can we ask, what was a bit of your background? How did you get into working in sustainability at the NCC?
Yeah, I have a background in, I did my environmental studies and physical geography study at Ottawa U, and I did a master in physical geography, and I was very interested in climate change and monitoring monitoring it through a glacial retreat in Ayaktuk National Park. So this is my background. I've always been very passionate about, I'm a very outdoor person, so this was very natural for me. And then it just continued, actually. Yeah, the passion just continued.
Well, did you grow up in Ottawa?
Yes. Actually, I was born in Gatineau, and I never left.
Does it feel good to be helping that same region move forward in sustainability?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Nice. So that kind of leads me to my next question. What do you enjoy about this work? Do you enjoy it? And if so, why? Like, what's the most interesting part of it?
I hope you can notice that I enjoy it, but I really enjoy it. I mean, I've been at the NCC for 17 years. And people are asking me, like, 17 years at the same place. Like, yeah. It's just that every year, like, there's 36 actions just for that strategy, and just working all the time on different projects that evolving and seeing the progress evolve too. Like, if you look at our previous environmental strategy, it was something completely different. And it's fun. We get to innovate and learn, and I have so much fun just, it's a very multidisciplinary approach. This is why I love this is what I like about sustainability, and I've never left because I never stopped learning. So this is great. Yeah.
That's really nice. What do you think has been, in your experience, your biggest win? Like, what's been your biggest victory in this job so far, in this kind of role? Doesn't have to be one.
No, well, this is, it's a hard question, actually. The biggest win, like, I don't see biggest win. I prefer all the smallest wins. I think that adds up, and that's very much a philosophy of life for me. So it's connecting with people and improving projects, for example, or improving plans, or thinking of new ideas together as a group. For me, it's something that I see as another win. So I don't think I have one big win. I think they're just like day-to-day kind of little victories throughout the year with my colleagues, and yeah, that's what it is.
Great answer. But I'm sure it's not all fun and games and winning all the time. Can you talk about what are some of the more challenging parts of both your work and in general working on sustainability in this big organization?
People that don't get it. Like, this is very, I mean, we're in 2020, and I don't think we need to convince people about sustainability in 2020. So this for me is one of the biggest challenge. There's challenges like financial challenges, capacity challenges, or political challenges, or regional challenges, but this for me is the biggest one here. Is like, I don't think we need to convince that sustainability should be at the core of every decision. So this is one of the big challenges.
But you find you still are having to convince of that sometimes?
Well, you have to work hard, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of, how do you continue to be motivated to have those conversations with people? Like, what's the biggest driver for you, keeping you interested and keeping you passionate about this work? I know you've got the background in it, but...
Yeah. I think, well, at the NCC, what is interesting, it's a small organization. We're about 450 staff, so compared to federal departments, it's a very small organization. And we have, I like to see say that we have, c'est quoi l'expression en anglais, on a les pieds sur chaque bord de la clôture, like we do a lot of planning, but we do a lot of implementation. So what keeps me going is that the fact that we can do a lot of planning, but I can see also the results of the efforts. So like, sometimes it takes time, but you always see the results at the end. So it's very concrete. That's what keeps me going.
So on the results, moving a bit away from you and a bit more towards the work, do you feel like you are where you wanted to be by this point in the sustainability development?
Well, in some topics, yes. In some other, maybe there's a little bit more traction. Is it what you say in English? Mm-hmm. Traction. I think so. I think we're doing a pretty good job. If last year, like, it was just the first few months of the implementation, and after 1 year, I think we are actually currently developing and implementing about 17 or 18 actions out of the 36. So I think it's taking like a lot of momentum. So yeah, I think so. Yeah, of course. Like, I mean, we have, you know, when you set those strategy, you have to ask yourself, do you want a realistic strategy or you want something to set the bar high? And at one point, I think, and this is, you know, how risk adverse an organization can be. So, you know, you want to be aspirational but realistic at the same time. So it comes to that a little bit, you know, you want to aim high, and then of course you're going to have challenges, but as long as you make progress, I think this is I think what we are currently showcasing, that we're making progress. And of course we're going to have some challenges here and there, but you know, we're learning. So.
Yeah. So I've got 2 more questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. On those challenges and those progress, I mean, a lot of it, you say, is convincing people who aren't necessarily sold on the fact that sustainability should be core to the strategy of your organization. Do you find that there's much resistance, and if so, where, from, you know, management, employees, potentially partners, potentially contractors? Where do you find that there is resistance, and where is it potentially most strong?
I think this is a very sensitive question to answer.
Just in broad strokes, and if not, that's okay.
Well,
or where's there been the most engagement? Let's say, let's flip it around. Where's there the most engagement in the strategy from within the company and from?
Yeah. Well, within the company, like within the organization, for sure, there's a lot of buy-in. You know, the NCC, maybe the general public thinks that we actually work with such a huge budget, but we don't actually. So when you come and you present, you know, new standards or new requirements, and of course it's sometimes, you know, it's challenging for, like, there's so many obstacles, and I think it's throughout, and I mean, we have a great new CEO that really believes in sustainability. We've had a past CEO and previous one that believes in it. I mean, I think, yeah, this is how I would turn it. I think there's some buy-in, like, not some, I have to be careful. There's a lot of buy-in. It's just there's also challenges that we need to take into consideration.
For sure. Okay, so my last question then. It seems like, you know, for having a potentially small budget, it looks like you're doing really great work, and I'm sure there's lots of support. What advice would you have to somebody who's in a different organization and might be facing a bit more, or, you know, having the feeling that the organization's not doing enough? What kind of advice would you have for them to
connect to networks like that? Talk to your peer organization, and, you know, or even like partners, or explore new opportunities, and have that kind of open discussion. That's what I would say. And find a champion within your organization, and, you know, be clear about your objective and your targets that you want to reach. And it's a lot of networking internally and externally. That's what I would say. Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that work on sustainability in their organizations. So my final question, I know I said my last one would be, if you could have people take one takeaway from this event tonight, from your work, from just generally working in sustainability, what would it be? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it ties to what I just said, actually, just to continue the discussion. And I don't know, maybe I can come back to that.
Yeah, for sure.
Take away.
Well, I guess that's a good moment. We can move to audience questions and then think about it in the background, for sure.
Yeah.
So quickly, big round of applause for answering those questions. It's you now. Do you have any questions from the audience? James?
Yeah, you had the graph where you showed 13% reduction in GHG off-grid, right?
Yeah.
What was the major contribution to achieve that?
The retrofits of many of the buildings at the official residence, buildings, and mostly at the official residences portfolio, the government general
residential portfolio.
And this is challenging because, like, we have a huge, like, heritage portfolio, so you cannot apply the same standards, and you want to preserve the heritage components of the buildings. But yeah, they've been working very hard.
A lot of leaky old buildings out there.
Yeah, and the thing is that you have, and when you read about that, is this doesn't include our maintenance contractors. It doesn't include yet our commercial and residential portfolio. So, you know, it really looks at the buildings that we own and control, or fleets. And this will be, like, the federal government is setting new standards. So we'll need to start looking at our business travel and include our Scope 3 emission. So it's just gonna take, it's gonna be a bit bigger in terms of footprint for sure.
When you talk about contractors and transportation and that, are you electrifying? Do you see the NCC eliminating their ice engines and weed whippers and so on?
We've been having meetings actually with maintenance contractors, and you know, the maintenance contractors also like looking into this in terms of cost saving. It's hard because if we're including this as in our contract,
sure,
it means that it costs more also for the organization to have those contracts. So we are evaluating all of this, and we have great contractors that actually are looking into alternatives. If you are like along the Rideau Canal corridor around Dow's Lake, they have those electric like cart or like the, you know, there's it's coming. It's coming. Yeah.
Well, you just tell them you're paying less for gas, and therefore the contractor.
And something else that I have to think is the health of their employees too, like the quality of the air that they breathe all day, and so I think there's a switch coming up.
Yeah, sure. Okay. You got another hand back there.
So you mentioned earlier that you have a goal to plant 100,000 trees. I'm working with a group that wants to plant trees, by the way, so maybe we should connect.
Yeah, let's connect.
Is that over how many years is the 100,000 trees?
It was a very much ambitious target that we set up in, like, you know, when we were drafting the strategy. We've been cutting a lot of emerald ash borer in the capital region. We had estimated about 100,000 ash tree, and we said that to compensate, we'll plant 1 tree for 1 tree cut. We're currently working with like our land managers and biologists to identify the potential sites where we could be planting. And I'm all ears to, you know, there's a lot of partners, private and public partners that want to plant trees on NCC lands. There's a lot of green space, but there's a lot to think of, like, you know, a lot of our lands are contaminated. They were transferred to the NCC, and it's like landfill. So we have to be careful where we plant trees. We want to make sure that we don't plant trees in all of the meadows to eliminate those pollinator habitats. You know, there's a lot to consider, and we're working on this, but I would be happy to actually connect with you after.
Great. I've seen this hand a few times.
Yeah, so most of this type of meeting usually starts with an acknowledgement that we're on the unceded Algonquin land. And I think that in terms of the archaeological digs, there's also evidence of Iroquois and possibly other nations having lived here. So I'm wondering how you manage the stakeholder consultations, because I think it being federal land and the UNDRIP, it would really put you in the center of all that. And I think that for a lot of stuff it's very difficult because it's not necessarily clear who you consult with and what the relations are between different Indigenous stakeholders.
If I can give you a concrete example, like the drafting of the forest strategy, it's a topic that is really at the heart of the Kitigan-Zibi community and the Pikwakanagan. So we've been, you know, in constant dialogue since the beginning when we started drafting the strategy. And in terms of their capacity, how actually can the content be influenced? What kind of actions can we actually work on together? I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge for the unceded territory at the beginning of my presentation.
Yeah, me too.
But it's like, this is one example where we have ongoing dialogues with both Algonquin communities in the National Capital Region. And I mean, this is just one example. I think we actually have that dialogue with them, and it's difficult, you know. You're right. It's complex, and I think we just need to continue on and be ready to include cultural importance into what we do. I mean, just in the terms of in the language that we use, you know, it's not NCC owned lands; it's lands that we manage. I don't know if you notice, and in my speech, these are the terms that we use now. Like, we don't want to say that it's lands that's owned and managed, but it's really we are managing the lands. for all Canadians, including the Algonquin Nation. So and I'm not an expert on that topic. I mean, we have, you know, a team for Indigenous relation, and we are in constant discussion with them. You know, for the forest strategy, both communities, Pequawkinigan and Kitigan-Zibi, inform us, like, you know, they don't want to be considered a stakeholder. They're really much a partner into that. You know, they're very much engaged, and we are also very engaged. Anyway, from sustainability point of view, yeah. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I just like, this is what I can tell you, because I'm not the expert on Indigenous. Like, that's why we have those colleagues that really help us in those files and how to continue the dialogue with them.
I think it's tough.
Yeah.
And you didn't have much in your presentation on that. Is there more on the website in terms of the partnership that you have?
There's probably a web page, a section. I should know that. There's probably, I'm turning to Stan, but I don't know. Let me get back to you. It's Angela, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, I will. Let's have the discussion, and I can.
The one thing that I would add is the NCC is what I would say is at the forefront of, we've had an Indigenous liaison for 10 years, over 10 years. We have a unique, Geneviève talked about the archaeological resources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The NCC has an MOU, has it's not a contract, we have an understanding, we have a signed agreement with the Algonquin nations about how the archaeological resources are managed, and that we do this jointly, especially over the summer. We have a team of students that work on archaeological findings. We have digs throughout the year. We have this memorandum of understanding, and we're using that as a model for a lot of the other work that we do. I don't know whether that's actually on the website, but if you're interested in that, we can also put you in touch with Ian Badgley, who is our archaeologist, and he has been called on by other departments of the federal government to assist in creating these type of agreements with other departments. So we do our best, and more than our best. I think we're trying to advance the dossier and to make sure that we have ongoing engagement, not piecemeal engagement for a specific project, but it's ongoing, and this is what we've been trying to do with the forest strategy, for example. Also, the forest strategy is a great example because there's expertise that we can borrow. So they have foresters on their staff at Kitigan-Zibi at least, and there's knowledge both technical from a forestry standpoint, but also from an elder standpoint and from a heritage standpoint, and we are incorporating all of that in the forestry strategy, even using certain things which might seem, to some people might seem banal, but are very meaningful for the communities, such as using Indigenous names for the species of the trees and other things like that. So we're trying to take a very holistic approach. There is always room for improvement, and we're always trying to do better. And to be honest, our partners often, they're very busy with a lot of other things that they're trying to do, and sometimes they're trying to get potable water to their people, and how we phrase the names of the trees isn't the priority for them right now. So we're trying to work in collaboration with them and get all of that, but we'd be happy to provide any other additional information that we have.
Thanks, Dan.
Yes?
Some of us were involved recently with the Ottawa strategic plan for the next 20 years or so.
The official plan?
The Ottawa, City of Ottawa.
Okay.
And one of the key recommendation was that we should just limit the expansion of the city. Urban sprawl was at stake. So I would like to understand the angle, or whether NCC is abiding by that thinking, or it just somehow lose towards it.
Well, it's a very interesting question. which I'm not fully equipped to answer, but you know, the Greenbelt is offering so much in terms of producing local food, providing green space accessibility to residents. So from a sustainability point of view, I totally agree that we need to create more density in cities. But I think it's important also to not forget that those green spaces are also essential to the quality of life of the residents. So, of course, a Greenbelt was creating to try control the urban sprawl, and of course it did overgrow the urban sprawl. So I think, you know, the earliest planner didn't see this coming. I mean, this is my take on it. It's I think very political, and I think it would be a bit delicate for me to address this. But we can definitely discuss further, or put you into contact with the right person at the NCC to answer your question.
Yes.
So it's follow-up question, James' question on the greenhouse gas emissions. So you mentioned that the NCC is going to include Scope 3 emissions in the inventory too. And are you stressed or nervous about that? Because just thinking of all the data collection and the outcome of it, is there any consideration on how to offset or how to address your Scope 3 emissions? Because, you know, you spend millions of dollars on the last 10%, 20% of the Scope 1, Scope 2, the energy emissions, and then maybe the money would be well spent on greening the global supply chain, for example.
Well, I think there's two parts of your question. The first one, in terms of data collection, yes, we're very stressed about it, because, not stressed, but it's just, it's a new way of collecting data for building infrastructure. So, you know, we've been very focused on the infrastructure itself, and not too much on, well, I should say that, like, we've been, you know, collecting through energy audits a lot of information, but you know, we need to make quite a shift in terms of how we actually, like, there's 1,200 buildings, for example. We need to track this. So yes, it's going to be a lot of work, but NRCan has that amazing tool called Red Screen that we're going to be using. So, and it's a tool, I don't know if you know about that tool, but it's a tool that's it's used throughout the world now. It's a very good tool. So at least there's solution and some tools to help us do that. The second part of your question, you're right. It's just how much, you know, when we do retrofits of a building, now we need to think of not only just the infrastructure to meet the building national codes, but also implement new standards and look at maybe more the life cycle cost approach, you know, for 25 years instead of just the capital cost at the beginning. So there's a lot of discussion happening on that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You mentioned when you were talking about delineating the canopy cover in Ottawa Gatineau that you did a collaboration with the University of Vermont, is that right?
Yes.
Do you do a lot of collaborations with academic institutions? Or?
There's been many actually that I know. I'm sure there's more. We do a lot of research, for example, in Gatineau Park through like Carleton and University of Ottawa, on like, you know, and Université du Québec en Outaouais, merci, on biodiversity and etc., species at risk. In 2005, when we did our first climate change study on the impacts on recreational and tourism, we've worked with University of Waterloo. There's a lot of actually academic partnership out there, and we have a whole team actually, research and ethics, that actually look at all those opportunities. And we have also students, master and PhD students, that actually work at the NCC to help us on various projects. So I would say that yes, there's a lot.